a mysterious baby left on her doorstep during a storm, a mother's love that defied bloodlines, and a golden ring hiding a dark family secret. For 7 years, Sarah raised Ethan as her own, but when the biological parents, rich, powerful, and dangerous, came to take him back, the courtroom became a battlefield. One small boy, 2 families, and one secret that could destroy them all. What would you do? Before we begin, please hit that subscribe button to join us on this emotional journey. Now, let's dive in. The small town of Havenwood was swallowed by the relentless symphony of a summer storm. Rain lashed against window panes, a drumming crescendo that intensified the oppressive darkness outside. Inside her quaint 2-bedroom bungalow, Sarah Miller, a woman whose life was a tapestry woven with quiet routines and the subtle hum of loneliness, lay in the restless embrace of sleep. Sarah, a dedicated elementary school teacher, found solace in the predictable rhythms of her days, lesson plans, grading papers, and the gentle camaraderie of her students. Her world, though modest, was entirely her own, a carefully constructed sanctuary against the echoes of a past she seldom spoke of. Tonight, however, this storm brought with it an unsettling discord. It wasn't the thunder, which boomed like a distant, angry god, nor the relentless drumming of rain against the roof. It was a sound far more fragile, piercing through the tempest, the faint, reedy cry of an infant. Sarah's heart, usually a steady drumbeat, lurched. A primal unease, a premonition she couldn't name, clawed at her throat. She fumbled for the lamp beside her bed, its warm glow pushing back the shadows, then hesitantly padded towards the front door. Hesitation warred with an inexplicable pull. Who would be out in such a storm? But the cry persisted, growing slightly louder, more desperate. With trembling hands, she unlatched the heavy oak door, pushing it open just enough to peer into the deluge. The sight that greeted her stole the breath from her lungs. There, nestled precariously on her doorstep, a woven basket, old and water-stand, lay abandoned. Inside, swaddled in a thin, sodden blanket, was a newborn baby, his tiny face a mottled purple from the cold, his fists clenched in miniature distress. A flimsy handwritten note, smeared by the rain, lay tucked beside him. "Please, miss, we have nowhere else to go. Please raise our child." Sarah felt a peculiar sensation, as if an invisible thread had just snapped inside her, severing her quiet past from an uncertain future. This wasn't a lost pet or a misplaced package. It was a life, fragile and utterly dependent. Her first instinct was a wave of panic. Me? A single teacher barely making ends meet? How could I possibly? But beneath the fear, something else stirred. A deep, ancient maternal instinct she never knew she possessed. It bloomed in her chest like a forgotten seed, blossoming rapidly despite the desolation of the night. She scooped up the basket, cradling the tiny bundle against her chest, feeling the warmth of its minuscule body seep into her. The baby's cries softened, then ceased, replaced with soft, trusting whimpers. His eyelids, translucent and delicate, fluttered open, revealing eyes the color of a stormy sky, yet holding an innocence that pierced straight through her carefully constructed defenses. In that moment, staring into those profound depths, Sarah knew she couldn't turn him away. She couldn't. The rest of the night passed in a blur of frantic activity. She warmed milk, found a makeshift bassinet, and held the tiny form close, marveling at the miracle in her arms. By dawn, as the storm finally relented and streaks of pale light pierced through the heavy clouds, she had made her decision. This child, whoever he was, wherever he came from, would be hers. She named him Ethan, a name that whispered of strength and enduring spirit, hoping his life would be filled with peace and fortitude.
7 years flowed by, a current of unwavering devotion. Ethan blossomed under Sarah's tender care, a vibrant splash of color in her once muted world. Their small bungalow, once a quiet retreat, now echoed with the joyful sounds of a child's laughter, the murmur of bedtime stories, and the enthusiastic recounting of schoolyard adventures. Sarah poured every ounce of her being into raising him. She taught him to read beneath the sprawling oak in their backyard, sang him lullabies that smoothed away childish fears, and patiently explained the world's wonders and its occasional cruelties. She taught him the importance of kindness, the joy of learning, and the quiet dignity of perseverance. For Ethan, Sarah wasn't just a guardian. She was Mom, the sun around which his entire universe revolved. He was a bright, curious boy whose quick wit and compassionate heart were a testament to the love that nurtured him. Yet a tiny, almost imperceptible detail remained hidden. Tucked away deep inside the very basket that had brought Ethan to her, long forgotten amidst the faded linen, lay a small, ornate gold ring, intricately carved with the delicate petals of a rose. It was a forgotten relic, a silent testament to a truth Sarah was yet to uncover. A truth placed there by a hand unknown to her, destined to surface when the time was right. It was a promise, unspoken, a beacon for a future storm. This forgotten ring, an unassumed burden, would one day become the linchpin of a battle far grander and more painful than Sarah could ever imagine. The quiet hum of her life was about to transform into a roaring crescendo, and the first notes of that tumultuous symphony had already been struck 7 years ago, on a rainy doorstep with the fragile cry of a baby and the unseen glint of gold. 7 years had painted Sarah's world in hues of vibrant joy, a stark contrast to the muted grays that had once defined her solitary existence. Ethan was the living embodiment of that transformation, his laughter a melody that banished the silence, his small hand in hers a constant anchor in a world that often felt adrift. Their life in Havenwood was a gentle, predictable current. School runs, picnics by Miller's Creek, evenings spent poring over storybooks, their voices intertwining in a shared universe of wonder. Sarah had built this sanctuary brick by careful brick, each act of love a mortar against the crumbling memories of her own quiet childhood, a past touched by the chill of emotional distance. She had poured into Ethan the warmth she had yearned for, creating a bond as resilient as old oak, as tender as a spring breeze. The tranquility, however, was as fragile as a spider's web glistening with morning dew, destined to shatter under the slightest tremor. It arrived not with a whisper, but with the roar of an engine. One Tuesday afternoon, as the golden autumn sun cast long, lazy shadows across the elementary school grounds, Sarah stood waiting, her heart a familiar knot of anticipation for Ethan's appearance. The usual cacophony of children's voices filled the air, a symphony of innocent joy. Then, a sleek, obsidian-black limousine, a jarring monolith of wealth in our humble town, glided to a silent halt at the curb. Its polished surface gleamed, reflecting the sun in a way that seemed almost predatory. A hush fell over the schoolyard, the children's laughter faltering, their eyes drawn to the anomaly. From the back seat emerged a woman, tall and exquisitely dressed, her tailored silk suit a second skin that spoke of exorbitant expense. Her hair, the color of burnished copper, was swept into an immaculate chignon, and diamonds glittered at her ears, catching the dying light. Victoria Hayes. Sarah felt an odd prickle of recognition, a phantom flicker in her memory, like a half-forgotten dream. There was a familiar sharpness to the woman's cheekbones, a certain haughty tilt to her chin that tugged at the frayed edges of her subconscious. Yet she couldn't place her.
Victoria's gaze, sharp and predatory, swept over the throng of children before settling with unnerving intensity on Ethan, who had just emerged from the school building, his worn backpack slung casually over one shoulder. His small face, usually alight with curiosity, seemed to dim under her scrutiny. A strange, almost desperate hunger filled Victoria's eyes, a raw emotion that seemed utterly out of place on her perfectly sculpted face. She moved with an almost ethereal grace, a predator closing in on its unsuspecting prey. "Ethan," she breathed, her voice a low, husky whisper that somehow carried through the sudden silence. She took a step, then another,
her hand reaching out, poised to touch him. Sarah, a guardian lioness, sensing danger, instinctively pulled Ethan closer, shielding him with her body. Her voice, though a mere whisper, carried the steel of protective instinct. "Excuse me, ma'am. May I help you?" Victoria's hand dropped, her manicured fingers flexing. Her eyes, the color of cold jade, finally met Sarah's. A flicker of something unreadable, recognition mixed with a peculiar blend of anguish and something colder, calculating, passed through them. You are Sarah Miller, aren't you?" Her voice trembled, a crack in the polished facade. I am her mother." The words struck Sarah like a physical blow, splintering the fragile piece she had so meticulously constructed. The world tilted on its axis, colors leaching from the vibrant scene, leaving only a stark black and white reality. Mother. The single devastating word echoed in the cavern of her mind, challenging the very foundation of her existence. Her grip on Ethan's hand tightened, knuckles white. Just then, the limousine's passenger door swung open again, and a man emerged. He was of similar age to Victoria, impeccably dressed, radiating an aura of quiet power and unmistakable authority. Richard Hayes. His face, though handsome, held a weary gravity, lines etched around his eyes that spoke of long nights and heavy burdens. He walked with a confident stride, his presence filling the space with a palpable tension. "Mrs. Miller," he began, his voice deep and measured. "This is my wife, Victoria. And that boy," he paused, his gaze sweeping over Ethan with a proprietary intensity that made Sarah's blood run cold. "Our son." He stepped closer, and, as he extended his hand, the cuff of his expensive suit jacket rode up, revealing a small, almost imperceptible tattoo on his inner wrist, a delicate, perfectly formed rose. Sarah's eyes, still reeling from Victoria's bombshell, briefly registered the image, a fleeting flash in the periphery of her awareness, but her mind was too consumed by the unfolding nightmare to dwell on it. Richard continued, his voice laced with practiced regret. "7 years ago, my wife and I faced an impossible situation. A series of grave misunderstandings, coupled with overwhelming financial difficulties, forced us into an unthinkable decision. We were young, desperate. We had no choice but to leave our son, hoping he would find a safe haven. We never stopped looking for him. Now that we are stable, successful, we've come to bring him home." His words, smooth as polished stone, were meant to soothe, to explain, but they felt like a betrayal to Sarah. Impossible situation? Overwhelming financial difficulties? This couple, tripping with affluence, spoke of hardship as if it were a distant, forgotten dream, not the grinding reality Sarah had lived for 7 years, alone, for their child. Ethan, oblivious to the undercurrents of adult deceit and despair, simply clung to Sarah, his small face etched with confusion. He looked from the grand strangers to his mother, his eyes wide with unasked questions. She could feel his tiny heart thudding against her leg, a frantic hummingbird. "I don't understand," Sarah managed, her voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to the hurricane raging inside her. He's my son. I raised him."
Victoria's eyes, though still holding that strange mixture of pain and calculation, softened momentarily, a fleeting mask of sympathy. "We know, Mrs. Miller, and we are eternally grateful. But he is our flesh and blood. He deserves to know his real family, to have a life we can now provide, a life of opportunity, comfort, and privilege." Her words, meant to sound benevolent, tasted like bitter ashes in Sarah's mouth. They spoke of a transaction, a reclaiming of property, not the reunion of a family. As the conversation continued, the tension crackled, unseen but palpable. Sarah, usually so composed, felt herself spiraling. She noticed Victoria's eyes darting towards the limousine. Inside, dimly visible through the tinted window, sat a third figure, a man with sharp features and a meticulously styled silver hairline. Mr. Blackwood, the Hayes' formidable lawyer. Victoria's gaze lingered on him for a beat too long. A subtle, almost imperceptible nod exchanged between them.
It was a silent command, a prearranged signal that sent a shiver down Sarah's spine. This wasn't a chance encounter. It was a carefully orchestrated maneuver. The contrast between the Hayes' polished demeanor and Sarah's raw, exposed vulnerability was stark. They were the epitome of power and privilege, their every movement deliberate, their words carefully chosen. Sarah, on the other hand, was merely a teacher, her strength drawn from a love that suddenly felt insufficient against such an imposing force. As the Hayes continued to press their claim, their voices a low drone in the fading light, Sarah's mind raced, desperate for an anchor. She looked at Ethan, his innocent face upturned, seeking reassurance from her. In his eyes, she saw only unwavering trust, a trust she vowed, with every fiber of her being, to uphold. This was not just about her. It was about protecting the tiny universe she had built for him. The first crack had appeared in her sanctuary, and she knew, with a chilling certainty, that the battle for Ethan had only just begun. The quiet life she had cherished was now just a memory, replaced by the relentless drumbeat of an impending war. The schoolyard confrontation left Sarah feeling as though she'd been struck by lightning, the aftershocks vibrating through every fiber of her being. The Hayes' limousine vanished as quickly as it had appeared, leaving behind a silence that was louder than any roar. A vacuum filled with the echoes of their unsettling claim. Ethan, sensing the shift in his mother's demeanor, clutched her hand tighter, his small face still clouded with confusion. "Mommy, who were they?" he asked, his voice a fragile thread in the sudden quiet. Sarah had managed a tight smile, pulling him into a fierce hug. "Just some people who made a mistake, honey. Nothing to worry about." But even as the words left her lips, they tasted of ash. She knew with chilling certainty that everything was about to change. The days that followed were a torment. The Hayes family, true to their word, wasted no time. Lawyers' letters, crisp and officious, began arriving like harbingers of doom, each one a fresh stab to Sarah's already raw nerves. They spoke of paternity suits, DNA testing, and the best interests of the child, words that felt cold and clinical against the fierce, instinctive love that pulsed within her. Sarah, a woman who had always navigated life's small currents with quiet resilience, suddenly found herself adrift in a raging sea. Her modest teacher salary, usually enough to cover their humble needs, now felt woefully inadequate against the implied financial might of the Hayeses. She imagined their sprawling estate, their endless resources, a stark contrast to her own cozy but small bungalow, where every penny was accounted for. The disparity was a chasm, wide and intimidating. Yet the thought of surrendering Ethan, of allowing these polished strangers to simply walk in and claim him like a lost parcel, was an agonizing impossibility. He was her son, not by blood, but by every sleepless night, every scraped knee kissed better, every whispered secret shared in the quiet darkness.
The news, as whispers often do in small towns, spread like wildfire. Sympathetic glances followed Sarah down the grocery aisles, mixed with the uncomfortable murmurings of curiosity and judgment. "Did you hear about that teacher and the rich couple? Poor thing, but blood is blood, isn't it?" Each hushed conversation was a fresh thorn, reminding her of the scrutiny she now faced. Sarah felt exposed, vulnerable, as if the very fabric of her private life was being unraveled for public consumption. The quiet dignity she always carried felt threatened, replaced by a gnawing sense of helplessness. Despite the fear, a steely resolve began to harden within her. For Ethan, she would fight. She thought of his unwavering trust, his innocent dependency, and a fierce, primal strength surged through her veins. He was worth every battle, every sacrifice. She sought counsel from Mr. Arthur Davis, a retired lawyer in Havenwood. Mr. Davis was a local legend, a man whose silver hair and kind eyes belied a mind as sharp as a newly honed blade. He was an old family friend, a quiet pillar of integrity in our community. His office, filled with stacks of dusty tomes and the comforting scent of aged paper, felt like a haven.
Sarah recounted the story, her voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as she spoke of her love for Ethan. She meticulously detailed the sudden appearance of the Hayeses, their polished aggression, and the unsettling exchange she'd witnessed between Victoria and their lawyer, Mr. Blackwood. Mr. Davis listened, his gaze unwavering, occasionally stroking his chin thoughtfully. He was a man of few words, but his silence was always attentive, filled with an unspoken empathy. "This will be a difficult case, Sarah," Mr. Davis finally said, his voice low and steady, a balm to her frayed nerves. "The law often favors biological parents, especially when they can demonstrate the capacity to provide significant material advantages." He leaned back in his creaking leather chair, his eyes fixed on some distant point. "However, the law also considers the child's best interests. And 7 years, Sarah, 7 years of dedicated, loving care, that counts for something, a great deal, in fact." A flicker of hope ignited within Sarah. Mr. Davis didn't just see a legal challenge, he saw the depth of her bond with Ethan. He agreed to take her case, a quiet promise that resonated deeper than any grand pronouncement. He was a beacon in her stormy personal sea, a small but powerful ship against the Hayes' imposing battleship. But the storm was far from over. One evening, as Sarah sat grading papers, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house, her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. Hesitantly, she answered. A voice, distorted and low, like static-laced whispers, slithered through the receiver. "Miss Miller," the voice rasped, the words barely audible yet piercingly clear. "You should drop this. You should let the boy go. Don't fight them. You'll lose everything." Sarah's hand trembled, nearly dropping the phone. "Who is this?" she demanded, her voice tight with fear. The voice chuckled, a dry, chilling sound that scraped against her nerves. "It doesn't matter who I am. What matters is what I know. They don't just want the boy for his blood, Miss Miller. They want to bury a secret, a dark, festering secret that goes back years, long before Ethan was even born. If you keep digging, you'll not only lose Ethan, but you'll lose your job, your reputation, everything you hold dear. They have powerful friends. This is your only warning." Then, a click. The line went dead, leaving her in a terrifying silence, the phantom echo of that chilling voice still reverberating in her ears. Her breath hitched, the blood drained from her face, leaving her cold and clammy. This was no ordinary custody battle. This was something far more sinister, a tangled web she had stumbled into, unknowingly ensnaring Ethan and herself in its threads. The anonymous call felt like a cold hand closing around her throat. It wasn't just a threat, it was a cryptic puzzle, hinting at depths of depravity she couldn't fathom. A dark, festering secret that goes back years? The words clung to her like a shroud, raising 1,000 unanswered questions. Could it be connected to the fleeting glimpse of the rose tattoo on Richard's wrist? Or Victoria's strangely calculating gaze? And what about the small, almost forgotten gold ring, tucked away in a keepsake box, a silent echo of Ethan's arrival? Had it been a message? A clue? A new kind of fear began to bloom in Sarah's chest, not just the fear of losing Ethan, but a dread that she was unknowingly endangering him by fighting. Yet the thought of simply surrendering him to people capable of such threats, people who clearly had something to hide, was even more terrifying. The conflict within her was a brutal war. Logic battled instinct, and fear wrestled with a mother's fierce, unyielding love. She paced her small living room, the familiar comfort of her home now feeling like a flimsy shield against an invisible enemy. The anonymous caller's words, "They want to bury a secret," resonated with a chilling finality. This wasn't about love or loss for the Hayeses. It was about control, about reputation, about something far more insidious. And Ethan, her precious Ethan, was merely a pawn in their dangerous game. The path ahead was shrouded in fog, riddled with unseen traps.
Sarah knew she had to proceed with extreme caution. But how could she fight ghosts? How could she protect Ethan from a secret she didn't even understand? The call had unveiled a hidden layer to the Hayes' intentions, transforming them from merely estranged biological parents into figures of menacing mystery. As night deepened, casting long, eerie shadows across her living room, Sarah sat by Ethan's bed, watching his peaceful, innocent face in the dim glow of his nightlight. His small hand, so trusting, lay limp on his pillow. He was completely unaware of the looming storm, the whispered threats, the intricate web of deceit swirling around him. A tear slipped down Sarah's cheek. She was a solitary warrior, armed only with a love as vast as the ocean, and a burgeoning suspicion that would lead her down a path she never imagined. The silent war had begun, and the first battleground would be the sterile, unforgiving arena of the courtroom. The morning of the trial dawned with a cold, almost clinical precision, a mirror to the sterile atmosphere that awaited them in the courthouse. Sarah woke before the sun. The anonymous threat from the night before was still a chilling whisper in her memory. Its words, "They want to bury a secret," had taken root, twisting her fear into a thorny suspicion. She dressed with a meticulous slowness, each buttoning of her blouse, each sweep of her hair, a quiet ritual of fortification. She refused to crumble. Not for Ethan, not for herself. The courtroom was a cavern of hushed anticipation, its high ceilings and polished wood exuding a solemnity that pressed down on Sarah's already heavy heart. Every detail seemed magnified: the rustle of papers, the low murmurs from the gallery, the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock, each tick a hammer blow against her fragile composure. Sarah sat beside Mr. Davis, his presence a quiet, steadfast anchor in the swirling vortex of her emotions. His silver hair seemed to glow in the subdued lighting, a beacon of calm. He gave her a reassuring, albeit weary, smile. Across the aisle, Richard and Victoria Hayes sat, an imposing tableau of wealth and unwavering confidence. Victoria, in a severe charcoal suit, her expression a mask of elegant control, occasionally dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, a performance for the gallery. Richard, though maintaining an air of stoic resolve, betrayed a flicker of impatience in his tightly clenched jaw. Beside them sat Mr. Blackwood, their lawyer. He was a formidable figure, his sharp features and penetrating gaze cutting through the air like an icicle.
He exuded an almost predatory intellect, his every gesture economical and precise. Sarah felt his eyes on her more than once, a cold, dissecting stare that made her skin crawl. The proceedings began with the grim formality of legal ritual. The bailiff's monotone voice, the judge's austere pronouncements, all seemed to float above Sarah, detached from the agonizing reality of her situation. Then came the DNA evidence. The sterile graphs, the scientific jargon, the irrefutable percentages. The expert witness, a detached figure in a lab coat, confirmed it. Ethan was, without a doubt, the biological son of Richard and Victoria Hayes. A collective gasp rippled through the gallery. A wave of despair washed over Sarah, cold and heavy. Her breath caught in her throat. The legal precedent, the undeniable science, it felt like an insurmountable wall. She squeezed Ethan's hand, feeling the tremors that ran through his small body. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and scared, mirroring her own inner turmoil. The whispers from the gallery began to grow louder, turning into a low hum of pity for Sarah and triumphant satisfaction for the Hayeses. It was a sound designed to crush hope. Then Mr. Davis rose, his movements deliberate, his presence commanding despite his age. He began to speak, his voice, usually gentle, now filled with a quiet power that cut through the murmurs. He didn't dispute the DNA. Instead, he painted a vivid portrait of the past 7 years. He spoke of Sarah's sacrifices, her unwavering devotion, the countless hours she'd spent nurturing Ethan, not just his body but his spirit.
He described the humble home filled with laughter and love, a stark contrast to the sterile affluence hinted at by the Hayeses. "Blood," Mr. Davis articulated, his voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. "Blood may connect two individuals physically, but love, care, and sacrifice, those are the threads that weave a family. A child needs more than just a biological lineage. A child needs a parent, a constant, loving, unwavering parent." And for 7 years, Sarah Miller has been exactly that, and more for Ethan. She built his world, nurtured his soul, and stood as his unwavering beacon. Mr. Blackwood, for the Hayeses, then took the floor. He was a master of rhetoric, his voice smooth as silk, his arguments sharp as razor wire. He spoke of the Hayeses' immense wealth, their vast resources, their ability to provide Ethan with an education, opportunities, and a life of privilege that Sarah, a modest teacher, could never hope to offer. He painted a picture of a gilded future for Ethan, free from the financial struggles that had presumably led his biological parents to their unfortunate decision years ago. His words were a siren song of material promise, designed to sway the court towards what society often deemed as better. "My clients have endured imaginable pain, the agonizing regret of a decision made under duress. They seek only to reclaim what is rightfully theirs, to provide their son with the life he deserves, a life that only they can truly offer." He glanced pointedly at Sarah, a subtle sneer playing on his lips, implying her love, however pure, was simply not enough. As Mr. Blackwood's words echoed, painting a glossy, seductive future for Ethan, a silent, almost imperceptible shift occurred. Ethan, who had been listening intently, his small face a mixture of fear and confusion, unconsciously tightened his grip on Sarah's hand. In that very instant, as if a small unseen force had guided it, the small gold rose ring, which Sarah had kept tucked away in a tiny velvet pouch, a relic from the day Ethan arrived, slipped from her pocket. It clattered softly, a delicate sound that, in the absolute stillness of the courtroom, resonated with the force of a bell. The tiny ring spun on the polished floor, reflecting the harsh courtroom lights like a miniature sun. Ethan, startled by the sound, looked down, his eyes fixed on the gleaming object. He instinctively bent down, picked it up, and, without thinking, turned to the judge, holding it out.
"This is mine," he said, his voice a tiny whisper, yet carrying an undeniable certainty. "It was in my basket when Mommy found me." The room seemed to hold its breath. Richard Hayes, who had been leaning back with an air of practiced indifference, suddenly stiffened. His eyes, fixed on the small gold ring in the judge's hand, widened in a flash of unadulterated shock. His face, usually so composed, contorted with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. He involuntarily glanced down at his own wrist, where the faint, familiar outline of the rose tattoo was visible beneath his shirt cuff. A cold sweat broke out on his brow. Victoria Hayes, beside him too, saw the ring. Her carefully constructed facade of composure shattered. Her jade eyes, which had been so cold and calculating moments before, flickered with a sudden, violent terror. A faint gasp escaped her lips, quickly stifled by a hand clamped over her mouth. Her gaze darted to Mr. Blackwood, a silent plea, a desperate question. Mr. Blackwood, for the first time in the entire trial, seemed to lose his composure. His eyes, usually sharp and unblinking, now darted between the ring, Richard, and Victoria, a complex web of emotions, surprise, recognition, and a flicker of deep-seated unease playing across his normally impassive face. He abruptly slammed his pen down on the table, a sharp crack that echoed the tremor now running through the Hayes' camp. He glanced quickly towards the courtroom door, a subtle, almost imperceptible movement, as if expecting someone. Mr. Davis, ever astute, noticed the sudden dramatic shift in the Hayes' demeanor and Mr. Blackwood's uncharacteristic reaction. The rose ring, the rose tattoo, the anonymous phone call, the pieces, disparate and unrelated before, began to coalesce in his mind, forming a nascent, terrifying image. He leaned forward, a new glint of determination in his aged eyes. He knew now, this ring wasn't just a trinket. It was a key to the secret that the anonymous caller had warned Sarah about, the secret the Hayes had been so desperate to bury. The calm, methodical pace of the trial had been shattered by the innocent action of a small boy and a forgotten piece of jewelry. The real battle was just beginning, and its true nature was far more sinister than anyone had imagined. The clatter of the rose ring on the polished courtroom floor was not just a sound, it was a detonation. It shattered the brittle facade of the Hayes family, exposing the raw, ugly truth beneath. The collective gasp from the gallery was almost audible, a wave of realization washing over the onlookers. Richard's face contorted in a silent scream of recognition, and Victoria's sudden, chilling terror spoke volumes before any words were uttered. Mr. Blackwood, usually an unshakable monolith, now had a flicker of something akin to fear in his eyes as he looked at the judge, then towards the courtroom door as if expecting the very ground to open up beneath them. Mr. Davis, Sarah's unwavering advocate, saw his opening, a narrow beam of light piercing through the oppressive darkness. He didn't waste a second. "Your Honor," he said, his voice gaining a new, formidable edge, "given the obvious distress and undeniable recognition from the petitioners regarding this item, I request permission to call an unscheduled witness." A ripple of murmur spread through the room. The judge, his expression unreadable, surveyed the scene, the trembling Hayes, the bewildered Ethan, and the quiet, resolute Sarah. He nodded, his gaze lingering on the small, ornate rose ring now resting on his bench. "Permission granted, Mr. Davis. Who is your witness?" "My witness, Your Honor," Mr. Davis announced, his voice now ringing with authority, "is Maria."
A collective gasp swept through the courtroom, followed by a confused murmur. The doors to the courtroom swung open, and a woman stepped inside. She was young, perhaps in her late 20s, with striking features that were beautiful despite the clear marks of hardship on her face. Her clothes, though clean, were simple, a stark contrast to the opulence of Victoria Hayes. Her eyes, deep pools of brown, held a haunting sorrow, but also a burgeoning strength. As her gaze swept the room, it landed on Richard and Victoria, and a flash of raw, unfiltered pain, quickly followed by a steely resolve, hardened her expression. Then her eyes found Ethan, and in that instant a tremor ran through her, tears blurring her vision. Maria walked with a quiet dignity to the witness stand, her journey across the courtroom feeling like an epic. Sarah watched her, a strange sense of familiarity stirring within her, though she couldn't place it. "Miss Maria," Mr. Davis began, his voice gentle, "can you identify this ring?" He motioned towards the gold rose ring on the judge's bench. Maria's eyes fixed on the ring, and a single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. Her voice, though trembling, was clear, filled with a raw, undeniable truth. "Yes, I can. That was my mother's ring. She gave it to me before she and my father died in the fire at the Hayes estate." The revelation struck like a thunderbolt. Richard Hayes slumped in his seat, his face ashen. Victoria let out a choked cry, burying her face in her hands. Mr. Blackwood visibly flinched, his composure cracking. Maria, her voice growing stronger with each word, began to unravel the tapestry of lies woven over 7 years. "My parents worked for the Hayes family for decades. They were loyal, honest people. But then Richard Hayes, he took advantage of me. He forced himself on me, and Ethan is the result of that." Her voice broke, but she quickly regained control, fueled by a searing mixture of pain and righteous anger.
Victoria Hayes knew, Maria continued, her gaze burning into Victoria, who now refused to look up. She knew everything, but to protect her husband's reputation, to maintain their perfect image, and to acquire my parents' small inheritance and their land, she threatened me. She said if I ever spoke a word, she would make sure I disappeared and that my baby would vanish as well. They told me Ethan had died in a fire they orchestrated to cover up my parents' true deaths and their crimes, a fire meant to destroy all evidence of their wrongdoing. A horrified silence descended upon the courtroom. The air crackled with the weight of unspeakable cruelty. The misunderstandings and financial difficulties cited by the Hayeses now twisted into a monstrous tapestry of manipulation, abuse, and murder. But I never stopped searching for answers, Maria pressed on, her eyes blazing. And then someone contacted me, someone who knew the truth. They told me Ethan was alive, that he was with Sarah Miller, and that the rose ring was proof. They told me I had to come forward. They said the truth needed to be heard, for Ethan's sake, for my parents' sake. Maria's eyes flickered towards Mr. Blackwood, a subtle acknowledgement passing between them. Mr. Blackwood, the formidable lawyer who had represented the Hayeses for years, now rose, his face pale, his voice devoid of his usual polished cadence. Your Honor, I have a statement to make, and I have evidence to present. He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The person who contacted Miss Maria and provided the crucial information was me. Another wave of shock rippled through the courtroom. Richard and Victoria looked at their lawyer with utter betrayal etched on their faces.
My father, Mr. Blackwood began, his voice hoarse with emotion, was the personal secretary to Mr. Hayes's grandfather for over 40 years. He kept meticulous records. He witnessed the Hayes family's ruthless ambition, their willingness to step over anyone to gain power and wealth, and he specifically documented the events surrounding the deaths of Maria's parents, who were indeed murdered, not by accident, and the subsequent exploitation of Maria and the cover-up of Ethan's birth. Mr. Blackwood placed a thick, leather-bound journal and a stack of yellow documents on the judge's bench. My father, on his deathbed, entrusted these to me. He made me promise to reveal the truth when the time was right, when an innocent life was at stake. My loyalty to my firm and my clients has been a heavy burden, but my conscience can no longer bear the weight of this deception. The threats to Miss Miller, the fabricated stories, they were all part of a desperate attempt to keep these secrets buried. But the truth, like a persistent weed, always finds a way to break through. The courtroom was a tomb of silent horror. Richard and Victoria Hayes, stripped of their power and their carefully constructed lies, were utterly defeated. Their faces, once masks of arrogant assurance, were now portraits of raw, unvarnished fear and shame. The judge, his face grim, nodded slowly. He understood. This wasn't just a custody battle. It was a criminal unveiling. He looked down at Ethan, who was now clinging to Sarah, his small face still etched with uncertainty, but also a growing understanding. Ethan, the judge's voice, usually stern, softened almost imperceptibly. You've heard many things today. There are many adults here who claim to be part of your family. Do you have anything you wish to say? The entire courtroom held its breath, suspended in a moment of profound anticipation. Ethan, a small figure caught in a maelstrom of adult deceit, slowly raised his head. He looked at Richard and Victoria, his eyes wide with a newfound fear and confusion, seeing them not as parents, but as imposing, unfamiliar figures whose presence now felt cold and menacing. Then his gaze shifted to Maria. He studied her face, searching for a connection, a flicker of familiarity, but found only the unfamiliar contours of a stranger, albeit one who looked at him with desperate, tearful love. Finally, his eyes found Sarah's. In her gaze, he saw only unwavering love, steadfast comfort, and the familiar warmth of home. Her wand, worn from years of gentle care, was a lifeline. A wave of profound certainty washed over his small, innocent heart. His voice, small but clear, resonated through the silent courtroom, cutting through the tension like a beam of light. I don't know those people, he said, pointing vaguely towards Richard and Victoria, his voice tinged with a child's pure, uncomplicated rejection. And I don't really know Miss Maria yet. He paused, his small hand instinctively reaching up to gently touch Sarah's cheek. I only know that Mommy Sarah is my mommy. She's always been my mommy. She took care of me when I was a tiny baby. She taught me to read and draw. She cooked me pancakes. She holds me when I'm scared. She sings me songs before bed. Mommy Sarah is my mommy, and I want to stay with Mommy Sarah. His words, simple yet profoundly powerful, resonated deep within every heart in that courtroom. They were words not born of legal arguments or biological ties, but of pure, untainted love and a child's unerring sense of belonging. Victoria Hayes openly wept, not tears of sympathy, but of crushing defeat and the bitter taste of a life spent chasing shadows. Richard sat frozen, a monument to his own ruin. Maria, though tears streamed down her face, nodded slowly, a bittersweet acceptance in her gaze. She understood. A mother's love wasn't just about blood, it was about boundless devotion.
The judge, visibly moved, cleared his throat. Based on the compelling evidence presented, the testimony of Ms. Maria, Mr. Blackwood, and crucially, the clear and heartfelt wishes of the child, Ethan, this court rules in favor of Ms. Sarah Miller. Full legal and physical custody of Ethan is hereby granted to Sarah Miller. He paused, his gaze hardening as he addressed Richard and Victoria. Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, you will also be facing immediate criminal charges based on the new evidence revealed today. Your attempts to obstruct justice and hide your past will be met with the full force of the law. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled her knees, washed over Sarah. Tears, hot and unbidden, streamed down her face. Ethan, his face suddenly alight with a dazzling smile, launched himself into her arms. "Mommy," he cried, burying his face in her shoulder. Sarah held him tight, the warmth of his small body a tangible proof of their victory. The future, once a terrifying abyss, now shimmered with the promise of continued love, rebuilt trust, and undeniable belonging. The rose ring, once a silent secret, was now a symbol of truth unveiled, a testament to the fact that family is forged not by genetics, but by the relentless, unwavering, and boundless love of a heart. Thank you, dear viewers, for joining us on this emotional journey through the rose ring's secret. This story reminds us that true family is built on love, sacrifice, and unbreakable bonds, not just blood. What lessons did you take from Sarah's unwavering devotion, Ethan's powerful choice, or the shocking truth revealed? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with your friends. Thank you.